Okay, this is the last Sunday morning sermon for the subject that we call Friends. Just called it Together We Stand. There's a song in the 60s, Together We Stand, Divided We Fall. Sounds a bit like the Four Musketeers, doesn't it? That type of thing. But together we stand. So just the last look at Paul's letter to Timothy. And tonight we'll look at the same subject, but tonight we'll look at his soon-to-be passing from this world into the presence of Christ. So we'll look at that this evening, God willing. Let's have a little look then. Verse 10, we'll start there. We'll come back to verse 9 in just a minute, but just to set the scene as to what's been happening, what's going on. 2 Timothy 4, it's the third time I've said that this morning, I think. 2 Timothy 4, from verse 10 we'll start from. Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus for Dalmatia. And in verse 12 it says, Tychicus I've sent to Ephesus. It's a case of some leaving for wrong reasons, some leaving for right reasons, some actually leaving because they've been sent to go there. Where we're told of Demas has forsaken me, the Christian being the supreme optimist. If you read the different commentaries, they say that Demas is a shortened form of Demetrius, and Demetrius is mentioned in John's letter, but I think that's stretching it just a little bit. There would have been other names as well, and I'm sure they would have called him Demas if that was the case. In John's letter, we find about Demetrius. But he's forsaken me. He's abandoned me. He's left me in a strait. He's left me and I'm stuck. Now we don't know the reason why, other than having loved this present world. He's gone to Thessalonica. That would, I would assume, is where he was from originally. But he's abandoned Paul. And not every story ends well. Not every story ends well. I wish it would be the case that every story did end well. But Demas has left. And we don't hear of him again. And so in reading this, it really is a warning to us, isn't it? A caution, how we must endeavour to continue to the end. We'll look at it tonight about fighting the good fight, keeping the faith, running the race. Write those things to the very end. One of the things that one writer says, it's easier to start than it is to finish. And that's very often the case, isn't it? We can start. Paul writing to the Galatians says, you started well, but who turned your eyes? Who beguiled you? Who turned your eyes from what you once focused upon, away from that to something else? We've been led away. And here we read of Demas, but we read of Crescens, we heard of him here, nowhere else. We don't know who he is, but he's made his way to Galatia. That was that first church, really, that Paul opened up with Timothy. After they left Cyprus, they went to Galatia, and that's where he first set up the churches that were there. That's where he first met Timothy, was in that area of Galatia. And so Crescens has gone there. Duty calls. Do you find that sometimes? That duty calls sometimes, and you're torn between two. Crescens, no doubt, he's there loyal to Paul in the prison. This is his second imprisonment now. This is not his first imprisonment that we read about in Ephesians and in Philippians. This is his second imprisonment. This is the one that he will never escape from. And Crescens, no doubt, his heart must have been torn between two. Sometimes we have to make decisions sometimes. They're not easy decisions. And sometimes the responsibility for other things calls us away. And we have no control on it. The call of the church there in Galatia was for him to go there. Titus, old faithful Titus. If there was trouble, Paul would send Titus. He had a stronger constitution perhaps than Timothy. Timothy found the Corinthian church abrasive. Titus went there and was able to lay things on the line. He was sent to Corinth. He was sent to Crete. He was sent to Croatia. He was in Macedonia with Paul. Titus was one of those people that you could send and be sure that what would be done would be right. But the call of God to a church we've never even heard of thus far, the church in Dalmatia. See, the church is growing. Paul is in prison. Peter is coming to the end of his ministry. Some of the disciples have already been martyred. But the church keeps on growing, you see. The church has already got representatives in Croatia, Dalmatia, if you want to call it. Paul, writing just earlier in regard to this letter, speaks of a church that was in Illyricum. Illyricum is what we would call Albania. And so the church is growing all the time. It's ever growing. Even though Paul is in prison, even though Peter can't do what he once used to do, even though some of the great leaders of those early days have gone, it's a wonderful thing to know that the church is not reliant upon one individual. It's a body ministry, it's a family ministry, it's a ministry that can't be centered into one person. Having said that, look at me this morning. I've opened in prayer, I've read, I've preached. You don't say much about me sometimes, is it? Just thinking of it. But the church is a functioning body that is ever growing. Ever growing. And so he's off to Dalmatia. Tychicus, he's sent to Ephesus. It's the second time at least he's been to Ephesus, Tychicus. Remember that we've come across him before. And he was the one that took the letter from Paul in his first imprisonment to Ephesus. And now he's going there, perhaps to pass on details, to uplift the church and build it up. Soon Ephesus was to be a church that would lose its first love. It's a church, when Paul writes to it in his letter to the Ephesians, finds hardly a criticism in it. But suddenly, just a few years later, it's a church that has lost its first love. How quickly things can change. Take nothing for granted. There, by the grace of God, we stand. It's by the grace of God we stand. And we need the Titus of this world, the Tychicus of this world, the Crescens of this world, to reach out and touch those other places that perhaps we can't teach, that we can't not teach but reach. And so God has, in these few sentences, spoken of a man that has left me in a strait. You can hear the disappointment in his voice. Demas has forsaken me. Crescens has had to go to Galatia. Titus, he's had to go to Dalmatia. It's splitting up all over the place. But you know, it's for the good of the church that these people are going out. Tychicus I've sent to Ephesus. Now we come back to verse 9. No, we don't. Verse 11, sorry. Verse 11 says, only Luke is with me. Only Luke. 2 weeks ago, I spoke to some friends in the church at Colossae, and he mentioned that bloke with a funny name, didn't he? Aristarchus, who stuck with Paul wherever he went. He was a sticker. Luke is an even bigger sticker. He's one of these characters. He speaks of him in these two. In Colossians, he says, Luke, the beloved, the much-loved physician. He was at Paul's side. God brings you friends like that sometimes. They can tend to your needs sometimes. They can succor you, strengthen you. The beloved physician. In Philemon, he's called my fellow laborer. In 2 Corinthians, it talks of an unnamed man who was sent to the church, or by the churches. And it says this, of whom all the churches spoke well. And they speak this of him, he is the glory of Christ. Most of the church fathers from those early days say that person was Luke. Imagine that being turned. I've only come across one of these two individuals, but I've heard similar stories. Ken Balsam got a lasting testimony of a great heart with Christ, of whom the churches speak well. I've never heard one bad word said against him. Jim Webber is another, down from Swansea way. I'd gone to a funeral. It was Ray Fix's funeral. And we were walking down from the cemetery down onto the road. And there was a lot, if you remember the choir that came up from Swansea? Because she was always toing and froing, wasn't she? Listening to the choir. And I was talking and someone just mentioned, said, oh, Ken Webber's here. Or Jim Webber. Ken Webber was my old boss in VT. I always got that, but anyway. Jim Webber's here. I said, you know, everything I've heard about him, no matter what church it is, speaking of him, they always say the same, how lovely a brother he is. What I didn't know is that Jim Webber was still right behind him. Isn't it lovely to say something and be oblivious to the situation around you? And you say something that is a compliment, that is not a contradiction. They're in Medcraft. Bobby Cox's close friend, 96 years of age. When I took his funeral, I spoke to the different ones. We were there early, not quite sure where the church was, and I spoke them through the different groups of people. And they all said the same thing. Greg, he was my Sunday school teacher. He was to an awful lot of people. So generous, so hospitable, so caring. He could rub you up the wrong way, man. Woe betide if you had something other than a King James version in your hands. But we have these characters. And Luke is one of these characters. Oh, for a testimony of whom all the churches speak well of. The glory of Christ. How about having that as an epitaph? Not what you've put on it, but what others have put on it. What a stamp to have, isn't it? So let us set the scene. Only Luke is with me. Verse 9 says this, Timothy, be diligent to come to me quickly. Verse 21 gives a little further understanding. Do your utmost to come to me before winter. He was in prison in Rome, but the prisons would be cold and damp. They wouldn't be central heated. He wouldn't have the rights that I was my mate man went down for GBH. And he said to me when he came out, he said, never again, man. Never again. And a few of my friends in work used to say, oh, the rights of prisoners and all these different things. He said to me, he said, you go in there. All you want to do is get out. At least for him. And so prison was difficult. About 1,500 years later, a letter was penned from a prison in a place called Vilvoorde in Belgium. His name was William Tyndale, and this is what he wrote. For Jesus' sake, send me a warmer cap. Something to patch my leggings with. A woolen shirt. But above all, my Hebrew Bible. We step back sometimes from what we call the social gospel. Notice what he puts first. Verse 13 says this, bring the cloak I left with Carpus at Troas when you come, and the books, and especially the parchments. 1,500 years later, that's now duplicated in it by Brother Tyndale. If you've seen the cap that they wore in those days, it's almost like a balaclava. Almost like a balaclava. For Jesus' sake, send me a warmer cap. Something to patch my leggings with. A woolen shirt. See the practicalities. The practicalities. I'll go in sometimes and visit someone. And one of the ladies from the church has come in either there then or come in after me. And I've noticed the difference between a man's visit and a woman's visit. That touch that a woman has. Straightening a cushion. Tidying up the room. You see, these things have spiritual consequences. You might not think they do, but they do. Just speaking to Anne Reese the other day. And this will encourage different ones that are put in situations like this. I said to Anne, oh, Anne, I said, I've got to make my way. Sorry, it's a shorter visit. This is what she said. Now remember what she's suffering from. The loss of memory. And she said, Martin, you will never know what it's like for someone to visit you until you're alone. The spiritual consequences. Spiritual consequences. Let's not be afraid of being socially caring. Notice he lists them before the spiritual. He makes it clear that the spiritual is more important, especially the parchments. Especially, above all, my Hebrew Bible. But he lists those particular daily needs. The things that can happen, the doors that open, when you do something so very, very practical. I remember Mo Brock saying to me of one family in Penyrheol when we were in Caerphilly Park one time. Sat on more the pitch and putt. Remember the old golf course used to be on the hill there? Just by the roundabout at the bottom. There used to be a roundabout. What do you call it? Is it a roundabout? It is a roundabout, is it? You know, the thing you run round in. And she said we were just sat there and we were talking of a family that weren't looking after themselves, a couple. And this is what Mo said, you'll never get in there. You'll never get. She didn't say it with a braggish way, didn't we? Because she knew the track record. They would never let you in. What did it? I don't know. But a simple question was, when we met this couple, would you mind if we brought you a dinner? Yes, all right. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. Let's not be frightened to bring social and spiritual together. God sees no division in it. We make the divisions. We say this is spiritual, that's not spiritual. This is secular, this is godly. He doesn't have that. We did that when we did Leviticus, didn't we? But even the field becomes a place where people can be cared for. You don't take all the fruit. You leave it there for the widow, the poor, and the foreigner. You see? Practical. Practical. That's all it is. And so we find with this brother. Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and when you come, bring the books, and especially the parchments. Verse 11. Get Mark, and bring him with you, for he is profitable to me for the ministry. We need reminding, you know. We did Mark in the last one, didn't we? Remember when he wrote to the Colossians? You've had instructions about Mark. When he comes to see you, you make sure you welcome him. Give him a warm reception. We need to remind ourselves constantly that God lifts up those that fall and restores them. What's Paul saying here? Bring Mark to me, for he is useful for the ministry. I've got a job that suits him down to the ground. Years before, he had dropped a clanger, and it seemed that it had stuck with him down through the years. Mark, oh, the boy that caused the division between his cousin Barnabas and Paul. Oh, the boy that left Paul and Barnabas and came back to his mammy there in Jerusalem. All those different things that stuck with him. You bring him to me, he's useful. I've got something that will suit him to a T. Do you know there may be something for you now? Suitable for you now. You say, but you don't know the mistakes I've made. Listen now. The Lord lifts up those that have fallen. He restores, and he is able to give new ministries or ministries from former days to renew them. We don't know. And so we have that. Greet Mark and bring him with you. Our old friends in verse, I think, is it verse 13? Is it verse 13? No, let's have a look. No, verse 19. Greet Priscilla and Aquila. We've heard of these before, haven't we? You know, they crop up from time to time. Again, Priscilla is named before her husband Aquila. She must have been some force, you know. She must have been some force. Obviously, Paul didn't see any a loss of balance in this relationship. It's not about someone who's being a bully or a dogmatic or a wife that is so domineering. Just like a husband can be so domineering and controlling. Not that type of thing. But it seems that her ministry was one that stood above her husband. We come across ladies like that sometimes, haven't we? Our old friends, Aquila, or Priscilla and Aquila. Paul wrote about them in Romans in the first study we did on friends, and he said this about them: my fellow labourers, for whom not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks. There's another couple of them. Fancy having that on you. They were Jews, but their ministry was among the Gentiles. And he says this of them: for whom they were willing to lay down their necks for me, to risk their necks for me. What type of friend is this? What type of friend is this? I've said before of John Lake, when all the rumours of funds being abused and all that went out, spoilers went out with voices that tried to undermine the work. Brother Lake was labouring there in America while his friends were labouring in South Africa, suffering no end of things with all the different diseases that go on there, malaria and so forth. And the funds were draining away because of rumours being spread. The rumours were incorrect. And he was beckoned by the missionaries that were out there and said, come over, we need to sit down and talk. And so they brought together, it was going to be a communion service. And Lake gave his speech and gave as much detail as he possibly could concerning the whole of the situation. And they asked him to leave the room for a moment, because it was almost as if the work was going to come to it. This is a church that had opened up hundreds of churches in the whole of South Africa, that had reached out to the tribal peoples, not to the whites, but to the tribal peoples, and lived with them, worked with them, helped them. And they gathered together, and they sent Lake out. And he always terms it in the surname, seems so abrupt, so brazen. And they said, Lake, come back in, after they talked. And this is what they said. He was thinking it was going to be the worst, and this is what they said. Lake, we ask one thing of you. When you hear of our wives and our children and our own selves laying down our lives for the cause of Christ, will you come and bury us? What friendship is that? Send me, for Jesus' sake, a warmer cap. Something to patch my leggings with. A woolen shirt and the parchments. Make sure you bring them with you. Aquila and Priscilla, willing to risk their lives for Jesus' sake, for Paul. Then we come to the one that's got the funniest name of all, Onesiphorus. Hands up with one a name like that. No, none of us did. Verse 19, complete the household of Onesiphorus. We've come across this term before, haven't we? The household. It means one of two things. Either he is not at home, so they address it as the household of Onesiphorus, or he has passed away. That's one of two reasons why. When we read of him in this book, in chapter 1, this is what it says of him. The Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesiphorus. Still, he's not there, he's not at home. He often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my shame. When he arrived in Rome, he sought me out very diligently. You know very well how many ways he ministered to me whilst I was at Ephesus. If you notice, it's all in the past tense. He's gone. He is no longer in this world now. We read of Aquila and Priscilla who risked their lives. Onesiphorus lost his life, gave his life for the sake of a man who was in prison. It's not he's not in transit between Rome and Ephesus, where his home is. Because he's speaking in the past tense. He is. We're not told how. But we can take this, that he has laid down his life for being identified with Christ and his servant. What kind of friend is this? In closing, may I introduce to you the greatest of all friends. This is what Paul said of him concerning the Lord Jesus. He loved me and he gave himself for me. The greatest of all friends. And these are epitomes too. I find it fascinating how sons very often reflect their fathers in their stature, in the way they look, in the way the different habits they've got, the different loves they have. Jeremy is constantly saying to me now, I am becoming my dad. I am becoming my dad. What better that we would become like him, like Jesus himself. What a friend we have in Jesus. What a friend indeed we have. I have a friend, oh such a friend. He loved me. Blessed be his name. May God give us a heart to be friends in this friendless world. In this friendless world. Let's lift our hearts to the Lord.